We know, I guess, as we've been doing a lot of work with the sector over the last few months, that this has been a really challenging time for all organisations, but we also know a lot of organisations at an early stage, a lot of startups have perhaps fallen through some of the cracks and really struggled in terms of some of the support that's been out there, in terms of funds they could apply for, even some of the self-employment schemes that were out there. So we wanted to pull together a session specifically looking at startups at this time. But I guess I always like to remain optimistic. We also know from previous periods of recession and tough times that often a lot of enterprise comes out of these moments as well, and a lot of new ambition and new ideas and that real innovation. So while it's really tough, we also know that this is also a great time for innovation and enterprise as we move forwards in the next few years. So what we've done today for our session is we've got three key speakers. We're going to start with Ray Banks from Firstport. So Ray is Lead Relationship Manager at Firstport, which is the startup agency in Scotland for social enterprise support. So delighted to have Ray with us today. And I know he'll be talking us through kind of the launch of the Social Entrepreneurs Fund that's just reopened. I'm sure he'll be touching on that. And there's lots coming out around New Start support at the moment. And then we felt it was really important to hear from people who themselves have been starting up organisations during this time and are in those early stages. So we are then going to hear from Rhoda from I'll Develop Kick. And we're also going to hear from Lou from Wellbeing Rebels. So really looking forward to today's session. Do post questions in the chat, and you're probably already sick of hearing from me. So I'm going to hand straight over to Ray. So over to you, Ray. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you. And no doubt you'll be sick of hearing from me very, very shortly. We've only got about 10 minutes, so I'll run this very quickly. Q&A is the place for any questions. So Firstport has a range of funds available for startups. We work primarily, if not solely, with startups, social enterprises. The most applied for fund is our Started Fund, which is up to 5,000, which is for the costs associated with starting up a social enterprise. After a year or so, then we look at Build It, which is up to £25,000 for wages primarily. For a year to kind of keep things going. We have Pounds for Purpose, which is a 500 quid fairy dust for young people who are wanting to do something in their communities that might turn into a social enterprise and just want to kind of test it out. And we also have the Social Innovation Competition, which will be running at some point, TBC date-wise, but is going to be based around a theme. This year's theme is going to be the great outdoors. We'll come on to that in a wee while. On top of that, we have Boost It, which was launched last year for the first time, which was originally for organisations providing environmental social impact or doing something to address climate change. That has now been removed as a criterion, but is still a priority. It is essentially a grown or a repayable grant from £30,000 to £50,000 for organisations that are looking to sustainably trade. So usually that's around 2-3 years in. So we won't talk so much about that in this session and concentrate mostly on Start It. SEF, or the Social Entrepreneurs Fund, was put on pause from March through to late July. I know there was a bit of worry when we were planning a relaunch as to whether there was any appetite for starting up businesses, given the current circumstances. I'm glad to say we had a flurry of applications as soon as we relaunched. So it still feels like there's an appetite out there for new business and new social enterprise in particular, many of which have basically been responses to the service gaps and needs that have been identified during the pandemic. Or during the first lockdown in particular. And for a lot of people who have been furloughed or unfortunately been made redundant, it has given them that time to think about what they want to do with their lives. And in a lot of cases, starting a business is one of them. So the types of enterprises we're coming in at the moment, and that are basically direct responses to the pandemic. a lot of mental health focused enterprises, a lot of physical health focused enterprises such as yoga and personal training, a few online platforms. We'll hear from one when I'm finished. A lot of outdoor activities as well. And that's where we're kind of getting the themed social innovation competition around the great outdoors, is because it's about it's going to be about appreciating Scotland. It was originally coasts and waterways, but we've expanded it to everything in Scotland essentially. So we're seeing also a lot more enterprises using digital solutions as a means to deliver services, much like Zoom or kind of online forums in particular. This is all a good thing. Out of terrible circumstances, there are very, very good things happening within the startup business industry, I suppose. There are also a number of challenges. We're finding that new social enterprises in particular need to be really resilient and agile, like from the get-go. One of the things that we've noticed whilst dealing with Third Sector Resilience Fund in particular is a lot of more established organisations, particularly in the third sector, have not been as resilient as they could have been. And thankfully the fund's there to help with that. But unfortunately, as Naomi said, a lot of startups are kind of falling in through the gaps when it comes to support at that stage. So they need to be more agile. They need to be more flexible in terms of their business model. Social enterprises who have kind of typically or traditionally relied on public funds or public contracts are probably going to struggle. There is a lot of money out there, but it's all been redirected to pandemic response. So things like council contracts, sometimes even the pupil equity fund, they're going to be a struggle to access. Not to say they're not there, but the kind of customers that are going to be dealing with, say, pupil equity fund, the schools are going to have other things on their mind right now. So actually accessing that's going to take a lot longer. Premises dependent enterprises, so cafes, for instance, are really going to struggle. One of the biggest issues that we found, anecdotally speaking, with startups is this rush to premises. It's something that as a relationship manager, I'm always kind of wary of talking to people about, because very often we're seeing people at such an early stage, it's just them. There's just, a one-man, two-man band or two-woman band. And very often people don't feel like they're legitimate unless they've got their own place to kind of call a base of operations. On one hand, premises will probably be more available than ever. But on the other hand, working out of them is going to be, very difficult to do. And those enterprises that rely on getting people in a room together are going to have to be very, very wary of social distancing and very, very aware of, the safety issues, because we will be when it comes to assessment and to the panel. That said, those being the challenges, the successful started applicants in particular are coming in with all the thinking part of it done. This is usually something that we push for at an early stage, is that they do all the kind of business modeling and the kind of market research, all the stuff that's effectively free before they come in for an application, ideally. People have had a bit more time on their hands. Some people have had a bit more time on their hands. So they've been able to do that. The other thing, and I think this is going to be a key thing that arises out of social enterprises that come out of the pandemic, is that very few, if any, are tying themselves down to anything that could be financially prohibitive in the event of a second lockdown. So again, premises. There's no point in establishing premises if a second lockdown happens, because you're not going to be able to use it. And some of the horror stories that we've heard through Third Sector Resilience Fund, through my own caseload, around landlords being completely intransigent about rent, even though those people can't actually get into the premises to trade, have been quite eye-opening. So a lot of the business models that we're seeing coming in, a lot of the successful business models we're seeing coming in, are ones that are agile and kind of nimble in terms of, you know, being able to respond to new funding, new trading opportunities wherever possible. So, and a lot more of them are coming in around the focuses, I think, of Scottish Government going forward are going to be around digital accessibility. That has been for a while, but I think it's going to be even more important now. And employability, specifically young people. And all the kind of other things that contribute to employability. So soft skills, self-esteem, confidence building, physical, mental health, that kind of thing, all leads to employability in the long run, because we've got a generation of young people who have not only been, shall we say, messed over on their exam results, but also have very little prospects at the moment. So that's going to be a key focus moving forward. When I say focus, that's not everything. I mean, we're always willing to look at whatever comes in, frankly. And just know that the support is there for it, through Just Enterprise, through relationship managers, to help get whatever idea that is off the ground, and hopefully at some point in the future get it to an investment place too. And that is all I have. So that's me. Questions in the question box. Thanks.
Thank you, Ray. That's a really useful oversight, I think, in terms of looking at the startup arena as it is at the moment, and handy, I think, to have some of those insights coming out of the experience on the Resilience Fund as well. So thank you very much for kicking us off today. I'm going to introduce, we always like to have social entrepreneurs themselves on our session. So I'm going to now introduce Rhoda Meek. So Rhoda is from I'll Develop Kick. And Rhoda, we were chatting a little bit before we started. I think you were saying you've been quite busy. So I guess giving us a perspective from a startup world, I think you can never be a startup and not busy, but interested to hear much more from you and learn myself about I'll Develop Kick and your startup experience at the moment.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's it has been a ride the last 6 months. The long story short is that I accidentally set up a social enterprise in the middle of a pandemic. And to give you some context about me, I live in the beautiful Isle of Tiree. We're about 40 miles offshore. Some people call us remote. I always ask remote from where. And I have been working remotely for the last decade, a lot of it in software development as a product manager. And I left that contract just before the pandemic started with the goal of setting up this wee tea label in Tiree to sell to tourists and as a gift product. And I thought, I'll be fine. I'll pick up some work. I'll sell my tea. It'll be great. And then the world exploded. And because I've got, I guess, digital skills, I thought, well, I'm going to have to up my online game when it comes to getting rid of these literally tens of thousands of tea bags that are sat in my spare room. And then I thought, well, other people are going to be struggling here. And I'm really aware there's a lot of small businesses in the islands who rely on tourist footfall. They either sell into retail in the gift market, or they sell directly to people in the islands when they're on holiday, and those people weren't going to be there. So I like to think that I look fairly young, but I'm older than I look. And I started doing web development way back in, like, when the internet was born really properly in the sort of late 90s. And it was a world of business directories and site rings where you sent traffic to each other. So I thought, right, okay, let's do a wee directory and see if anyone's interested. And so I built this directory and asked people with island businesses to sign up, and that's what they did. And it kind of felt like a bit of a wave. It sort of took off. And before I knew it, I had hundreds of small businesses in this directory. And then I started realizing that these businesses, a large number of them were selling via Facebook pages. And so they couldn't check out. They couldn't take cash easily. They were losing a lot of sales. And I thought, well, we could promote them even more by having an online marketplace for the islands, kind of like Etsy. And so I started to onboard small businesses and set them up. And so we have Isle20, ISLE20.com, which is an online marketplace and a directory for all of these fantastic small businesses in the islands. So that's Isle20. And then I thought, what about doing it with food? So I set up Ileats, which is like a kind of Just Eats, but for the islands and for local food suppliers. And I'm piloting it in Tyre right now. And then, having basically run to keep up, I suddenly started thinking, what am I doing? Like, what is this? And I reached out to an organization called Codel in Uist, and they gave me some business coaching, basic mentorship, just talking to me. And I realized that it was more, what I was doing was more than e-commerce and a selling platform. In the Scottish Islands, we rely heavily on tourism. And this year, because we have a very short season, people lost pretty much their entire year. And, you know, we're staring down the barrel of yet more uncertainty. And so we have great businesses who trade well beyond the islands, but we also have a lot who focus on tourism. And one of my passions is about the resilience of islands, keeping young people and young families here, letting people come back, having good jobs that aren't necessarily just seasonal, that there's a bit more security for people. And I realized that things like IL20 have shown a need to support small businesses in the islands who have a quite unique set of circumstances. And actually there was loads that we could do. And people were approaching me with some ideas. And I thought, okay, this is more than e-commerce. This is actually an incubator, basically. And so I took IL20 and IELTS, which had been going through my books, and my accountant may yet fire me. And I incorporated them in July into I'll Develop Kick. And the goal is that these in-house projects will generate revenue. That revenue will go back into marketing, advertising, supporting small businesses, and helping get some really innovative ideas started in the islands, with the goal of these profits all going back and staying within our communities to keep our communities strong and vibrant. And yeah, that's the long story short of how I ended up setting up a kick. And I kind of did it, and I was like, now what? I, you know, in the early startup stages of everything, you're not going to be paying your bills. There's costs associated with it. And so I started doing some research, and I found Ray at Firstport, applied to Firstport. I'd been waiting for it to open, and applied and started having conversation with him, reached out to the Social Enterprise Academy as well. And I discovered that there's a huge amount of support out there. Sometimes websites and forums feel really daunting. But I've discovered that taking a deep breath and just talking to people, calling them and asking questions, there's a huge amount of support out there. And it has opened up so many channels into new groups and things that I didn't know were out there before. I've discovered GrowBiz. I was in a webinar with them, and they've got a rural enterprise directory. So I've discovered them, and I was in that webinar yesterday, and starting to make connections and contacts. So yeah, we're delighted to have got in touch with Firstport for sure. And I guess some learnings for me have been around reaching out for help, because it is there. Sometimes even when money isn't there, just talking to people, finding someone you can talk through your ideas with has been incredibly helpful for me. Being able to change direction and flexibility. I'm very fortunate that I guess have digital skills, and so it's very easy to spin something up and spin something down and see what's working. Flexibility has absolutely been key, and it's going to keep being key for me going forward. Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things that I've learned and keeps getting driven home is that it's okay not to say, I am one thing, but to keep looking around, whether that's ourselves and our skill set, or whether that is what we're doing. The environment is changing so fast. And I love that was reflected in my conversation with Ray as well. One of the things I often do is apologise for my somewhat checkered career history, which started as a children's TV presenter, morphed somewhere into a recovering cafe owner, and then ended up doing product management for a Silicon Valley company. And I usually apologise for it with a sort of bit of a grimace. And what I really appreciated is the interest in that, and the sort of the seeing it as a strength that done lots of things and tried lots of things out. So I would just encourage anyone, I guess, who's thinking about it to give it a shot and reach out and have conversations.
Thank you very much, Rhoda. I got the sense, I mean, obviously we hear a lot of the stories of people that have really struggled as they've done startups, but actually you've given us a different perspective and hopefully a sense of enthusiasm. And I was really pleased. It was interesting you were chatting to Codal. I've actually got calls booked in with them myself today at 1 o'clock. So it's great. And you know, just to reiterate that ecosystem of support is phenomenal out there, particularly for social enterprise here in Scotland. Many people look at our kind of eco support system with some element of jealousy, and I think really utilising it, particularly at those startup stages, can be really, really valuable, and finding those critical friends and people that perhaps can introduce you to networks or know their way around. So I was really pleased to hear about that as well. So thank you so much for contributing. I can see some questions already starting to come in. Just general questions around social enterprise startup are absolutely fine as well. So people can feel free to post those. So without holding back and making sure we've got lots of time for questions, I'm going to bring in Lou Irvine now. So Lou is founder and director of Wellbeing Rebels, and delighted to have you with us as well today, Lou.
Example of pivoting right now. I had some few notes about what I might speak about, but having heard Ray and Rhoda, I've slightly changed that. The ever-changing world. So I'm Lou from Wellbeing Rebels. We're a social enterprise based in Glasgow, but one of the benefits of COVID is that we've been delivering workshops all over the country for the last few months. The stage that I'm at, which is worth saying, is I'm just finishing a year with the School of Social Entrepreneurs. And I'm just about to sort of officially launch in a few months' time. So I thought I would start actually. Well, first of all, telling you what Wellbeing Rebels is. We're basically deliver training and workshops and offer peer support, and basically a community of people that have grown through adversity or have recovered from mental health. So it's very much focused on growth and recovery. And mental health is obviously a very hot topic just now. I'm going to share a bit of my own story, but before I do that, Naomi, who's my glamorous assistant, is going to launch a poll, hopefully in Zoom. And I wanted to ask the question to everyone who's came along today: what has your experience of mental health been? So it's completely anonymous, and it's just to answer that question. So have you experienced difficulties with your mental health? So you can answer, again, totally anonymized. I currently live with a mental health condition. I've experienced mental health difficulties in the past. I don't have a mental health condition, but I have experienced increased anxiety during lockdown, or I have never experienced any mental health difficulties. So I'll give you a few minutes to answer that. And the reason I'm asking that is I really want to try and break the stigma of mental health. People with mental health being seen as, the weakness or broken, and actually celebrate the resilience and the recovery of people living with mental health. And I'm going to share a bit of my own story later. Okay, if you want to close the poll, Naomi, hopefully everyone's had a chance to vote. It'll be interesting to see. Yep, so we've got, 24% currently living with a mental health condition. So a quarter of people on this call today. 18% have experienced mental health difficulties in the past, but fortunately not now. Almost 30% don't have a mental health condition but have experienced anxiety during lockdown. So that's a third of people on the call today, and a third have never experienced any mental difficulties. And I'm willing to bet if I asked that third if they've ever looked after someone or cared for a family member or friend who had a mental difficulty, the answer would definitely be yes. So I think it's fair to say that we're all touched by mental health, and even more so in lockdown. So a bit of my own story. It's very strange speaking into a black cube. I'm hoping people are actually listening and not just doing their Tesco shopping online. So Wellbeing Rebels was born, probably the seed of it, was born about 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I had been working in international development. I've been working with Red Cross, Action Aid, Oxfam, traveling from the UK, Asia, Australia, Africa. And I came back home 5 years ago, completely burnt out. I was emotionally, physically, mentally, I had nothing left in the tank. So I came back home, and I was very fortunate that I had a good relationship with, my local GP, and I went along, and again was very lucky that I got a referral to mental health services, and very quickly get diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, which is a bit of a shocking diagnosis, but sadly quite common in international development. Everything I read online was really depressing about post-traumatic stress. I might not be able to work again. I'd have difficulty holding down relationships. So I just kept searching the internet for some positive stories. And eventually I found some talks about post-traumatic growth. And that's basically about people who've experienced adversity but have grown through it. And I thought, that's the story I want. I'm going to find as much out as I can about post-traumatic growth. And at that stage, I was, things were so bad and I was so unwell. Sometimes I couldn't leave the house for 3 days at a time. I remember once, all I wanted to do was get a pint of milk from Sainsbury's for a cup of tea. And just for 3 days solid, I kept going, today's the day, I'm going to get the pint of milk, I'm going to leave the house. No, it's not. So it was pretty unwell at that stage, but with the right sort of support, medication, therapy, I started getting better. And the more I read about post-traumatic growth as well, which I found really inspiring, reading other people's stories who'd recovered. And what they told you is that resilience is like a muscle. It's not something people have or don't have. It's like a muscle in your body, like any other, that you build and you get stronger. And every time you step outside your comfort zone and do something that scares you, your resilience muscle gets stronger. So the first thing that scared me was getting a pint of milk. I eventually forced myself to go out, got the pint of milk. It was then going to therapy. And every time I did something, I felt stronger and stronger. And I've continued that journey, reading more about post-traumatic growth, reading more about trauma, understanding it better, and just continuing to do things that scared me. So the last 5 years are not what I expected my life to be. I thought I would be working for Red Cross in some far-off land doing development work. But actually where I am is much better than I ever could have imagined, because I've continued to do things that scare me. I remember being quite scared of boxing, so I thought I should definitely do some boxing. I then hadn't ridden a bike for years, so I got a bike, started doing mountain biking, spending time outside. Then one of the last things I did was I was still looking for things to keep building that resilience muscle, still, to feel strong and brave and resilient. And someone had suggested to me, we had a conversation with my friends, what's the scariest thing you can do? And they were saying, I think it's stand-up comedy. And I thought, that's terrifying, getting up on stage doing stand-up comedy. I should definitely do that. So a year ago, I did my first stand-up gig just after I turned 40. I absolutely loved it. And since then, I gig regularly in stand-up comedy. And it's so good, believe it or not, from anxiety, which sounds like a crazy thing to say. But I think what I know now from my research around PTSD and around anxiety is that you do have to step outside your comfort zone to build that resilience muscle. So I know that I keep having to do that. So that's when Wellbeing Rebels, the idea was born. I went on the SSE course to try and explore that idea, to look at what that actually looks like in practice. I started piloting some wellbeing workshops before lockdown in the woodlands. So I was working with a few people, piloting wellbeing workshops in the woodlands, teaching people how to build fires, forage, cook on fires, just things that made them feel obviously a little bit kick-ass. A lot of women say, after learning how to build a fire and cooking their own food, you feel that kind of resilience. But then lockdown happened. And I could have, been totally knocked by it. But funnily enough, when lockdown happened, we had to stay inside. Having lived with PTSD for quite a while, that's something I'm really good at. So I had lots of resources and lots of toolkits for how you cope with being inside all the time and keep your mood up and keep well. So friends and family just kept coming to me saying, can you deliver a wellbeing workshop? Can you tell your story? Can you talk about resilience? So a bit like Rhoda, what I thought was going to be a quiet time, I work full time as well in an office job, ended up being a really busy time. which was fantastic because I also got loads of, it was basically I was forced into pilot. I kept saying, I'm just researching, I'm doing surveys, I'm doing lots of research. And then when lockdown happened, people asked me for a workshop, I was like, okay, I just need to go for it, I need to pilot. Yeah, so I started piloting the workshops and was brave enough to start charging for them. And they've just kind of grown from there. I was asked to speak about the challenges and opportunities of lockdown. I wanted to draw out 3 things that I sort of learned personally. One is you never think you're ready. You never think you're ready to launch a social enterprise. I'd say I need to have a website first. I think Ray mentioned I need to have premises first. I need to have all these things first. But actually, one of the most important thing is just researching your market. Is there a market for what you want to do? Is there demand for what you want to do? Test the idea, get feedback, and keep changing the idea until it's exactly, you know, my wellbeing idea. To give you an example, I went from teaching wellbeing in the woodlands to running a Zoom woodland wellbeing session where we had to, you know, we did like, we used a plant house to do introductions. I did a meditation with sounds from the woodlands, and we learned about all the things you can forage at the different time of year. Where was your local park or garden? So we did like wild garlic or elderflower, and find out where your local park is in Glasgow. So it was amazing, you know, what you think you're going to do and what you actually end up doing. So I'd echo what Rhoda says about being flexible. So yeah, one thing is you're never ready to launch. You just make a decision to launch and you do it. And the second thing is about social enterprise is we don't have all the skills that we need to have a social enterprise. I was really impressed with Rhoda talking about all the digital skills. It was the opposite of that. I had a brick of a phone for years. So teaching in the woodlands I really loved. And then when we went online, my first thought was, well, I can't do that. I'm rubbish at technology. I'm rubbish at computers. But through the support of my other social entrepreneurs who took time to show me, to teach me, we did lots of skill shares. I learned how to use Zoom to the extent when a few months later, other social entrepreneurs were then contacting me to ask me how to show them how to use Zoom, which made me laugh because I really was the worst at technology. So yeah, just learning that you can skill up and you can adapt, and asking for help from peers. The other thing I was going to say is, for me, the fear never leaves you, I think, in terms of having your own social enterprise. But for me, courage is about feeling the fear and just stepping into it anyway. You know, I had fear about charging for my workshops, fear about doing research. What if the feedback was, we don't need your product or service, or we're not willing to pay for it? Fear about applying for funding. So I think that's why peer support is so important. I have loved being part of like a social entrepreneurs group, because actually we skill share, we help each other, we plan together, we goal set together. And I think I always imagine it like when you've got your own social enterprise, it's like jumping off a cliff. You know, you're looking over thinking, this is so terrifying, but I'm just going to jump into the water. But your peer group is everyone holding your hand going, we're all really scared, we're just going to all jump off anyway. So it's still scary, but it helps you do it. Yeah, and I think in terms of changing and opportunities, I think it will continue to be like this. The future for Wellbeing Rebels now is what I never thought it would be, which is offering a mixture. It's mostly online just now, but it will be a bit in the woodlands going forward. I also thought I'd just work with community groups, but actually in practice, a lot of corporates ask me to deliver workshops. So again, there's something about not being too fixed on what it is you want to do. What I really want to do is create a space where people can share their stories of recovery, inspire each other, learn tools and techniques to stay well. And that can be done in lots of different spaces. And as I found out, can also be done online to great effect. Yeah, so I think, yeah, that in terms of, the future for Wellbeing Rebels is definitely, we've got a crowdfunder happening in November to raise some funds for an app, something I never thought I would do. It's translating our wellbeing book online, and also applying for some funding for our first year. So yeah, lots of exciting things ahead. So hopefully that was useful.
Thank you so much, Lou. I used to work a lot with startups in my own time at Firstport, and I know how inspiring it really is when you hear people at the start of that journey, and that description you just gave of kind of stepping off the cliff is so common. At what point do you start? And it's a really tough one. I guess I'd only say not everyone has to be a stand-up comedian to start a social enterprise.
Well, that's what I was going to say. To build your resilience muscle, I just started with going to get a pint of milk. I've worked up to the stand-up comedy. So yeah, anything that's out with your comfort zone. It might be looking at the Firstport website, sending an email to a friend that's got a social enterprise to have a chat, anything. It's just taking action. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm going to invite our other speakers back on now in terms of any questions. Brilliant. I can see Rhoda and Ray both here. And I know we've already had a couple in the Q&A, and some are quite specific about setting up a social enterprise. So I'll kind of deal with those ones first, and then just come back to some more general comments, I guess, because there's lots I think we can take from today. So I'm going to put the first one to Lou. I'll put it to you first, given you're still off mute, and then Rhoda. So you both set up as community interest companies. What were the key reasons for that choice, and did you consider other models?
Yep, I absolutely did. It's quite hard to get your head around, to be honest, to start with. So I'd say definitely go to one of the sites. There's lots of different, like Social Enterprise Scotland, or to read about the different models. Because I made a mistake the first time I set it up, because I didn't realise the difference between a kick, guaranteed, or shares. And you probably don't if you're listening just now as well, but you can ask for help and find out. So mine's is a kick and guaranteed, and it's got an asset lock. And the reason I chose that is, I suppose, the ethos of Wellbeing Rebels is about having the most positive impact we have. And that's about getting as many people involved as possible. So it made sense to reinvest the profits to then be able to offer a sliding scale or some pro bono work to groups. So for example, I did some group with some refugee groups, just a group of refugees just now, and I'm not charging. But actually I did some corporate work that paid for it in a pay it forward model. So that just feels really important to, I think in this current climate, everyone has a need, but not everyone has the resources. So you can tell a bit of a socialist, but I think, yeah, that's the, corporates do have the money to pay for it, so it's then paying it forward to groups, and the kick model worked best for that. Yeah.
Thank you, Lou. And Rhoda?
A very similar thing. I actually hadn't heard of a kick until some random person that I met once on Entirely then messaged me on Twitter and was like, I see what you're doing. I think this is a kick. I was like, I've never heard of that. So yeah, I had to do an awful lot of reading as well, and ask questions of people. But I chose a kick because one of the things I really felt when I first set up Aisle 20 was that in order to be able to do it, as it turned into a full-time job, I was like, I need to pay my bills. I need something for this. And so I took a margin on the sales, and I wasn't comfortable about it, but I kind of had to do it. And what I really love about turning it into a social enterprise and into a kick is that there's a focus on being profitable, and I think that is across the board for what I want to do for small businesses in the islands. And for islands, we have to be profitable. We're not going to have subsidies. We've got to find ways to make ourselves resilient and profitable. So there's that aspect. But at the same time, being able to reinvest those profits, which I'm determined there will be, into our communities is brilliant. It's not money going out to Airbnb. It's not money going off the islands. It's money staying in. And that was just it was really exciting to be able to kind of choose that model and realize that I could both figure out how to make things profitable, but also access all of the support that's out there. And it was like this great combination for me.
No, thank you. I know, obviously, Ray, I'll perhaps bring you in on this, but Firstport run a number of sessions helping people look through different legal structures and very much getting that set up. And obviously, depending on what you want to do, will determine what finance you want to raise, what business you're in, will have a big impact on legal structures. And so, Ray, I didn't know if you just got any kind of words of advice just on that, or just if you've got any upcoming sessions you've got on legal structures for anyone that wants to join that webinar.
I didn't realise I had to look at the Just Enterprise website before we did that. Probably is the answer to that. It's one of those things that keeps coming up with for people at a very early stage because it is baffling. And Companies House doesn't exactly make it easy to register a kick by guarantee because the default there is private company limited by shares. So in terms of legal structures, the guys at Just Enterprise will help you find the one that fits the best. We don't have any preference, though I do tend to ask questions if something comes in that wants to be, say, a charity, which usually has a lot more kind of admin involved. Very often the ones that we see are just companies limited by guarantee, and then they go to kick status or they go to charitable status later on. We don't really have a preference.
No, thank you, Ray. I think, I mean, it's not uncommon in my experience. People will often set up as one legal structure and end up changing to another, because actually at a startup stage, you don't always know what's right. And I think a lot of the reason people use company limited guarantee as a starter sometimes is if they're not sure it's the easiest one perhaps to change and adapt. So it's, again, if you're not sure, think through, which ones might be easier to change in the future. If you are sure, brilliant, just, work out all the pros and cons of the different ones before you get going. But, there's always help out there, even for people that need to change legal structures as they move forward. So don't let that be a barrier to starting, I guess. It's, I think, coming back to the points we've heard from both our speakers today, sometimes you just have to start. You're never going to be 100% ready. You just have to start. So I'm going to, while you're on, Ray, I'm just going to pick up, because it's a more general one about, do you see social enterprise as the same as the third sector? And I've got a few thoughts on that as well, but I'm always happy to hand it over to panelists first.
This feels loaded, this question. Okay, so if we're being as objective as possible, the third sector is defined as anything that isn't the public or private sector. So it's kind of defined by an absence. In practical terms, and in my personal experience, when people talk about the third sector, they're talking about the charity sector, or they're talking about the unincorporated community association sector. They're not necessarily talking about social enterprise. And one of the biggest red flags that I get at assessments is when somebody comes in and says, I want to start a not-for-profit. Because that means you've not looked even slightly at legal structures or business models. That's my immediate knee-jerk, and that's a personal thing, and we will talk about it. But for me, I think social enterprise kind of fits halfway between private and third sectors. The competition as we see it should probably be the private sector. Why not? Why not play them at their own game? And then it has that kind of social impact attached to it as well. And within and between private sector and social enterprise, you have the kind of B Corps, the mission-led businesses as well. So yeah, I see it separate, but legally definitions probably mean, yeah, it's probably the same, but I see it's separate. And I think a lot of social entrepreneurs do too.
No, thank you, Ray. And I mean, certainly, I think even in my years of experience in the social enterprise sector, people's perspectives on what constitutes a social enterprise are changing. And I always say it's still at its root is that social absolute determination to make a difference and change is at the heart. And, that's the thing that distinguishes us primarily. I just was looking through the chat function, and another of the legal structures that came up that we hadn't chatted through was around community benefit societies, and they're particularly there in terms of organisations that are looking at a community shares model, which is a very particular form of crowdfunding. And if you're looking at raising funds through community shares, you need to be either set up as a cooperative or a community benefit society. And there's, again, very specific legal advice on that. And Toby, who put that comment in the chat, I run sessions with him quite regularly looking at community shares models. And I know that they'll run sessions too. So again, when you start to go out and get advice, I think if you're a startup out there and you approach organisations like Firstport, we're all very familiar with other people in the ecosystem, and we'll point you towards those very particular, maybe more niche areas of support. But I think we definitely see more people look at that kind of community share option moving forward. So there is potential in that. So another legal structure to throw at you out there in case you were joining our session to find out more about that today. I just wanted to ask, obviously you've both spoken about taking quite a brave step to actually get started and that building up resilience. If you were to kind of rate, and it's really difficult right now, I know things are changing so much. Are you optimistic about what's around the corner? Do you remain uncertain but just ready to adapt? You know, how are you approaching moving forwards with looking at a startup at what's been quite a turbulent time for all organisations?
Yep.
Lou and then Rhoda?
Yeah, I think for myself, it depends what it is you're doing. As Ray said, if you're thinking about opening a cafe or running a premises to rent desks to social entrepreneurs, like that might not be a good time. Might not be a good time to do it. But because I do well-being, it was almost taken out of my own hands. I kept sort of slowly over the last year doing research, testing it, focus groups, and then when COVID hit, the need for well-being went up so much that I just had to jump in and start responding to it. And I actually finished my full-time office job in the end of this month because I've had to say no to a lot of opportunities, and I don't want to do that. And Rhoda's nodding, you're probably the same. It's like when it gets to that tipping point where you're like, oh, I would love to do that piece of work. I work Monday to Thursday. So I work every Friday in Wellbeing Rebels, but I'm fully booked and there's things I'm saying no to. So I've made the really tough decision. I work for an organisation that measures social impact. My director is also a social entrepreneur. So in London, she's so supportive. She's like, Lou, go and do it. You have my full support. We'd love to have you back. I suspect you won't come back, but if you do, that'd be lovely. So the worst that can happen, so I'm very lucky I've got a safety net, but I think the need for well-being is just exploded. Yeah. So it's like getting contacted by corporates, community groups, individuals, a lot of people shielding. So I deliver wellbeing sessions for visually impaired or people with long-term conditions that are housebound. So I really love the woodlands and being outside, but can't get to do it just now. So I've been doing that as well. Yeah. Yeah. So I feel very optimistic in that. Unfortunately, I think wellbeing will be a big area of growth. Yeah.
Yeah. No, remaining brave, I guess, is. Yeah. It's really hard. I mean, certainly, I'm sure Ray would say, his experience with lots of startups through Firstport is many of them will be trying to set up a startup while actually having a full-time job or a part-time job, getting that balance is really tough. And actually, well-being is so important. Ray, I see you've unmuted.
Yeah, so. Definitely, because this is one of my pets. This is one of my pet subjects. I would say also that well-being is really important for social entrepreneurs.
Yep.
And turning stuff down can be a good thing. There's two ways to fail. I think in the beginning is to go out there and it's just crickets and there's nobody wanting your services, or there's too many people wanting your services and you kind of overextend and burn out. So yeah, it's across the board. It's really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I said a really scary statistics that said 1 in 3 social entrepreneurs experience burnout within the first 5 years. Because I was looking at doing a wellbeing session for social entrepreneurs. But yeah, I think that's why I've made the terrifying decision to give up my work, because it is, we're entering an economic recession. A lot of my friends have been made redundant and I'm giving up my job. So that's really scary, but also it feels right. And I've been working on it for over a year now, so I wouldn't do that lightly. And I have business lined up. So for me, it's about sustainable business model and having my time to work on that. And a sustainable business model does not mean working 60 hours a week. If I can get enough money to cover my bills and expenses and feel like I'm having social impact, that's the dream. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, thank you, Lou. And Rhoda, how are you feeling in terms of things moving forwards? Tourism's still up for quite a challenging time, I think.
Hugely, yeah. I think, how do I feel moving forward? I don't know. I feel like I actually haven't had time to pause and properly assess it. It's like all the data I'm gathering on the website. It's like it's all there. It's great, but I really need to crunch it at some point. I am positive, actually. I think I'm really optimistic. I see people here, as in the islands, are starting to think outside the box. People are approaching me wanting to do things, and I'm going to have to start saying no, I think, at some point. I'm in the opposite position where I've had to take on a part-time job. So I think I am optimistic in that I think the projects that I'm currently involved in with I'll Develop are ones that have life beyond the tourist season. It was born out of the COVID crisis, and therefore I think these will continue to be needed. I'm continuing to add vendors and products to aisle 20. People are continuing to see a value in it, and hopefully we can increase a winter season. In terms of like the next set of projects, I'm really excited about who's coming to talk to me and the conversations I'm having with people who are just like, I've got an idea, but so that's kind of awesome. I think just like Lou's been saying, it's about like flexibility all the way. I have a kind of a software management background, and it's a lean development model, we call it, and it's basically you build something, you see what happens, you just throw it out there, see what happens, you measure something, and then you learn, and then you redo it. And I guess that for me is the beauty of working digitally to start with, is that I'm very free to be like, oh, that didn't work, let's just kill that and do this. And yeah, so I'm excited by the opportunities. I'm utterly terrified by the economy, the future of tourism, and you know, just the extent of getting started. I'm so inspired by what Lou was saying. I live with bipolar disorder, which I'm very open about, and I think, you know, you start something like this, and if you don't swallow hard, like, you know, what impact is going to have on me, then yeah, you'd be daft. So I've got to think about that as well. But I'm excited.
Thank you, Rhoda. It's yeah, I mean, it's hard, regardless of whether you're a startup enterprise at the moment, to ride this roller coaster that we're all on at the moment. So I'm going to perhaps touch on, because we've just got a few minutes left, and perhaps one of the questions, and I'm going to point it perhaps towards you, Ray, if I may, is obviously we've got two presenters on today looking at well-being and obviously digital, and they've been quite a theme, I guess, as we've gone through COVID. Is there a fear that entrepreneurs that aren't looking at those kind of themes that have come out of COVID responses might get almost left behind? Is there still opportunity for people with ideas outside of kind of digital well-being, food bank type initiatives to kind of be coming forward at the moment?
Of course. No, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I mean, the reason why I've mentioned those things in my bit was because those are probably going to be Scottish Government priorities. Our priorities remain the same. If it's a good social enterprise, we'll fund it. It's as simple as that. We're not, yes, it is very competitive, but at the same time, we don't play off social impact against social impact at Firstport. You know this. We take individuals and get them to that next stage, and our whole funding platform is such that we don't shut the door on people if we can help it. Like, if it's not quite ready yet, we get them to work on it and come back in. We want to support every single good social enterprise out there, and we don't want to lose any of them. I mean, I say this as lead relationship manager. I don't want to lose any good ones, because those good ones are the great ones next time.
No, I think that's really important to know. And, you know, I would always have come from the perspective that if we really want to be open to innovation, we've got to be open to all ideas. So if we run, yes, at times programs might end up targeted, but actually if every program was targeted, we're missing out on those great ideas that aren't on anyone's radar yet. So we have to keep the door open.
And frankly, all the stuff that's coming out of COVID, if we're seeing 20 organizations all delivering digital skills, then we're going to start wondering, well, have they actually done their market research? Because there are going to be other organizations delivering digital skills or well-being courses. Well-being courses is, you know, it's one of the toughest sectors to work in. So you need to have that edge on it. So if anything, you know, as much as I love these enterprises, when I get something truly esoteric and weird in, I'm all over it. Those become the ones that I end up going, yes, this one, look, you know, so.
Ray Banks, esoteric and weird. That's how I'm remembering this. No, thank you. And I'm conscious we've literally got a minute left, and I like to keep things pretty tight. Lou, you've already given 3 top tips, so I'm just going to come, perhaps Rhoda, in terms of if you were to give out 3 top tips to social entrepreneurs starting out, what would your tops be? And then top tips be, and then I'll just finish with Ray on that same question.
trust yourself and your skills and your life experience. What are your lived experiences? And every single one of those feeds into what you're trying to build and create. So trust yourself. Ask for help, for goodness sake. It could be anyone. It could just be bouncing an idea off. You know, I'm still talking about what I'll develop is and attempt to frame it. So just, you know, keep talking to people. And I'm going to echo what Lou said about doing things that scare you. I call it swallowing a frog. And try and swallow a frog every day if you can. Something that, you know, start the day with something that gives you palpitations. My anxiety, for example, is listening to voicemail. I hate voicemail, so that's one of the things that I try and do. So yeah, ask for help, trust yourself, and swallow frogs. And you're welcome for that visual image.
Thanks, Rhoda. This is a great session. Ray, 3 top tips from you?
Tips. Well, in terms of applications, let's just do that, because I think that the others are kind of covered there. I would say know your market, know who's paying for this, whatever you're going to be doing. Number 2, I'd say know the difference you want to make, like specific difference you want to make, because if you're going to be a social enterprise, you're going to have to prove it every single time you put in funding application, and the more measurable the social impact, the better. And 3rd, I would actually just reiterate the trust yourself. You are doing this for a reason. You are not, people don't set up social enterprises to get rich. They don't set up social enterprises usually to get the glamour. You're fundamentally a good person for trying to do this, and know that there is support out there, a whole heap of support out there to help you get to that next stage. Most funders, especially us, we're not like, no, go away, never come back. It's not that. It's about getting everybody up to the same level. So just so.
Thank you so much, Ray. I'm a bit upset it's not all about the glamour, because I was quite liking my introduction as a glamorous assistant from Lou earlier. I've never been called that before. Thank you. There is just one last question that's come in. So having promised that was the last question, just someone's kind of talking about getting market demanding, so their idea is quite innovative. Can they, if you haven't approached Firstport, I guess my top tip would be go into Firstport. They will point you towards, they will either be able to support you through that or point you towards others that can. Would that be fair advice, Ray?
If we ever do have to, if it's ever a bad fit, then we'll find somewhere that it's a good fit. The other thing I want to kind of flag up, I think it was in the chat, is that there is a general feeling, and I've been to a bunch of different sessions where people are saying, well, it's the same old people getting the same old money. Obviously, Firstport's not like that, and I think it's been usually kind of targeted at the Third Sector Resilience Fund. The thing that people need to remember about the Third Sector Resilience Fund is that very often this was preventing many job losses. So the smaller organizations weren't being successful because there was always one man and a dog. So just to be aware that it's at Firstport in particular, we are very much looking for the new blood, always looking for the new blood, because they will help change the old blood into being a bit more effective. So.
No, thank you so much, Ray. I thought that was useful, and there's so much out there. If you need any advice on kind of ecosystem support, or, you know, I think School for Social Entrepreneurs was also mentioned. There's lots of stuff out there. Community Shares is Community Shares Scotland. Always contact Social Enterprise Scotland if you need any pinpointing in any of those right directions. We're happy to help too, and really utilise that support that's out there. So I'm just going to say thank you all for what's been a great session this morning. I'm sorry we didn't have any time for any stand-up at the end, Lou, because we could have pulled you in to finish the session with a few jokes. Instead, people have had to put up with my inane chat. So thank you so much to everybody, and we will see you in some of our future sessions. We do have one actually looking at the challenges of tourism coming up. We're about to do one on looking at the Social Investment Scotland's Retail Academy, promoting that for those organisations that are looking at more support around promoting products and services. We'll be doing a bit on Buy Social, which is our own campaign we're about to launch. So there's loads of sessions coming up, and you can find out about them all on the Social Enterprise Scotland events page. But come along, and if you're not sick of me after an hour today, I'm here every Wednesday. So I'd love to see you back, and thank you to everyone that's joined us today. Thanks all.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.